They didn't come. I never imagined my wedding day would begin with silence. No ringing phones, no messages, no cars pulling into the small garden we had rented. Just me. In a lace dress I bought secondhand, hands shaking as I tried to breathe without crying. There were 12 chairs set out for guests. 11 of them were empty. My best friend Emma was adjusting a small bouquet of wildflowers near the altar when she realized, "Wait, your parents aren't here yet?" I checked my phone again. Nothing. No running late. No, we're on our way. Not even congratulations. My stomach twisted into a knot. "They'll come," I whispered, even though I didn't believe it anymore. 3 days earlier. 3 days before the wedding, I had stood in my parents' kitchen practically begging them to come. "Mom, please, it would mean everything to me." My mother didn't look up from the sink. She washed the same glass over and over, like it was more important than her only daughter's wedding. "You're rushing," she said. "Why the big hurry? Weddings are supposed to be grand." I tried to keep my voice steady. "We don't want something grand. We want something personal, small, meaningful." My father leaned against the fridge, arms crossed. "Small weddings are embarrassing," he said. "People will think we're cheap." There it was, the real reason. It had never been about me, only about how I made them look. "I'm not inviting anyone," I said softly. "No extended family, no neighbors, just you." My mother finally turned, eyes cold. "If you want a small wedding, fine, but don't expect us to sit on folding chairs in somebody's backyard." She exchanged a glance with my father. "We're not going," he said blankly. "Have fun with your budget ceremony." That was it. No warmth, no hesitation, just rejection. Wedding mornings, here I was, wearing a dress I loved, standing under a string of soft fairy lights and handmade decorations. And no family. My fiancé, Ethan, hadn't seen me yet. We agreed on the old tradition, no seeing each other until I walked down the aisle. So I waited and waited. The ceremony was supposed to start at 5 p.m. It was 5:17. Emma squeezed my shoulder gently. "Maybe they're stuck in traffic," she whispered, trying to give me hope I didn't deserve. But the hope shattered when my phone finally buzzed. One notification from my mother. "We decided not to come. We don't support this." Support this? Support what? My marriage, my happiness, my choice? Or was it the lack of a ballroom, a catering service, and a 200-person guest list? I stared at the message until the words blurred from tears. They didn't just refuse, they refused on the day of my wedding. Ethan's sister, Claire, came over and saw my face. "Oh God, what happened?" I handed her the phone. She shook her head in disbelief. Who does that to their own daughter? I couldn't answer. I just held my bouquet tighter, petals trembling with my hands. The walk down the aisle. The music started, soft, slow, beautiful. Emma asked, "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I nodded, but tears spilled down my cheeks as I stepped forward. Every step felt heavy. I had imagined my dad walking beside me, holding my hand, whispering that he was proud. Instead, I walked alone. When I reached the altar, Ethan saw my face and immediately knew something was wrong. He mouthed, "Family?" I shook my head. His jaw tightened, pain flickering in his eyes, but he didn't look away from me. Instead, he took my hands, lifted them gently, and pressed his lips to my knuckles. It was the moment everything changed, because in the middle of that heartbreak, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen from my own blood. Love, choice, commitment. Our officiant cleared his throat and began, voice warm and steady. "We are gathered here today to celebrate something far more powerful than a room full of witnesses. Love doesn't need an audience." Ethan squeezed my hand. My chest ached, but for a different reason than before. Maybe this was enough. Maybe love was enough. After the vows, we exchanged rings, whispered promises, and kissed beneath the fading orange sky. We were married, 2 people, 5 guests, no family. Emma took photos on her phone because we couldn't afford a photographer. We ate cupcakes instead of a cake. We danced barefoot on the grass to a playlist from a Bluetooth speaker. It was small. It was simple. It was imperfect. But it was real. Still, that night, after everyone left and Ethan fell asleep with his arm around me, I cried quietly into the pillow. Not because the wedding was small, but because the people who should have cared the most didn't care at all. And somewhere inside me, a seed of resentment planted itself so deep that I could feel it growing roots. I didn't know it then. But life has a strange sense of balance, because 3 months later, everything would change, and the same family who refused to attend my wedding would show up uninvited, smiling like they had always loved me, the moment they found out who my husband really was. And that day, I would finally stop being the quiet one. Invisible child people assume family breaks overnight. They think one betrayal, one argument, one ruined wedding suddenly destroys everything. But my story didn't start on my wedding day. It started long before, years before, when I learned what it meant to be the invisible child. Growing up in my own home as a stranger. My parents weren't abusive. There were no yelling matches, no bruises, no drunken nights or slammed doors. Sometimes I wish there were, because at least those things meant someone felt something. Instead, there was silence. Cold, polite, distant silence. My older brother Jason was the golden child. Honor roll student, varsity sports, popular, handsome, loud, the kind of kid who would sneeze and get applause. When he got a B+ instead of an A, my parents rushed to the school to ask if the grading was unfair. When I got an A, they barely looked up. "You're supposed to," my mother would say. "You're the careful one." I was proud of him. I wanted him to succeed. But somewhere along the line, I became the shadow he stood in. Not the favorite, not the troublemaker. Just there. When I tried to be seen. In 7th grade, I auditioned for the school's winter choir concert. I practiced for weeks, reading lyrics under the covers at night, humming when I washed dishes, whispering the harmonies on the bus. When the day came, I dressed in a navy dress and white shoes, hair pulled back into a ribbon my grandmother had given me. She was the only person who ever made me feel special. I looked for my parents in the audience, row after row after row, empty seats where they should have been. Afterward, when I got home, still smelling like stage powder and sweat, my mother was folding laundry. "How'd it go?" she asked without looking up. "We got a standing ovation," I said, trying not to sound hopeful. "Oh, that's nice." No smile, no hug, no "I'm proud of you." Then my father walked in carrying a Tupperware container. "Guess what?" he said. "Jason won his basketball game. He scored the winning point." He said it like a national holiday. They went out to celebrate. I stayed home and washed the dishes from dinner. And that's when I realized, in families like mine, love isn't distributed. It's earned. And some of us never got the rule book. College. My first escape. I worked hard in school, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like it was the only way to matter. Scholarships were my only chance to get out. So I studied. Late nights, early mornings, extra credits. When I got accepted to a respected university across the country, I expected something, anything from my parents. Congratulations, a hug, a tear. But my dad just said, "Well, at least you won't be in our way." My mom added, "We don't have money to help you. Don't ask." I didn't ask. I packed 2 suitcases, hugged my grandmother goodbye, and left. I cried in the terminal bathroom, not because they were losing me, but because I knew they didn't care. But stepping onto that plane felt like stepping into oxygen for the first time. Nobody knew me there. Nobody ignored me. Nobody compared me. I could be someone, maybe even someone worth noticing. Meeting Ethan, before he was the CEO. People always assume I married him for money, that I chose him because he was wealthy. But the truth? When I met Ethan, he was eating instant noodles in a dorm hallway, sitting on the floor because his roommate locked him out. He was wearing a hoodie with a hole in it, hair messy, laughing at himself. He didn't look like a billionaire's son. He didn't act like one either. He just looked human. I shared my granola bar. He gave me half his noodles. We talked until 3 a.m. about everything: music, books, childhood, fears. I didn't know it then, but something inside me shifted. I wasn't invisible. He looked at me like I mattered, like my words were worth listening to, like I existed. We went on coffee dates in cheap student cafes. We studied in the library until it closed. He walked me home when I was tired. He made me laugh in ways I didn't know I could. He wasn't rich to me. He was safe. And I fell in love quietly, the way people fall asleep on warm afternoons, slowly, completely, without realizing it happened. When I introduced him to my family, I was nervous, but hopeful. Maybe if they saw how good he was, how kind, how genuine, they would finally be proud. I should have known better. We drove 14 hours for Thanksgiving, Ethan holding a pie he baked himself. He bought flowers for my mom, a book for my dad, a scarf for my grandmother. He tried. My parents barely looked at him. Dinner was painful. "What does your father do?" my mom asked sharply. Ethan shrugged. "He owns a manufacturing company." "Oh." Her eyes finally flickered with interest. "Where?" Ethan smiled, polite as always. "Around. Michigan, mostly." He said it casually. He didn't brag. He didn't clarify. He didn't need to. But my father interpreted it as small-time business and lost interest instantly. So they didn't like him. Not because he wasn't a good man, not because he wasn't respectful, but because they thought he wasn't rich. On the drive home, I cried quietly, staring out the window so Ethan wouldn't see. But he saw. He always saw. He held my hand and whispered, "You don't have to earn love, not from me." And that was the moment I knew he was the one. The engagement they didn't care about. When he proposed, just the two of us on a snowy bridge overlooking a frozen river. I cried harder than I ever had. I called my parents that night. My mom answered. "We're engaged," I said, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. Silence. Then, "You're too young. You should wait. And if you think we're paying for a wedding, we're not." I never asked them to pay. My father didn't even get on the phone. My grandmother was the only one truly happy for me. She cried, told me I deserved the world, and said she couldn't wait to meet the man who loved me enough to keep me warm. She passed away 2 weeks later. My parents didn't tell me until after the funeral. They didn't want to bother me during midterms. That was when something inside me started breaking in a way that couldn't be fixed. The wedding decision. A huge ceremony didn't matter anymore, not after losing the only person who ever truly saw me. So we chose something small, a garden string, lights, wildflowers, close friends, a simple vow. When I told my parents we wanted a small wedding, they rolled their eyes. My father, "You'll regret not having a proper one." My mother, "Who even has a backyard wedding? People will gossip." It wasn't about celebrating love. It was about showing off. So when they refused to come, I wasn't shocked. It still hurt, yes. But shock? No. I was used to being unimportant. I just never thought they'd be so cold on the most important day of my life. After the wedding, silence again. After they skipped the wedding, I didn't hear from them for weeks. No calls, no congratulations, no curiosity about how it went. Just silence. Until the day everything changed. The day they learned who Ethan really was. The day their sudden love came crashing through our front door, dressed in fake smiles and greedy intentions. And that was the day I finally learned that family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is the people who show up. And sometimes family is the people you learn to walk away from. The secret they never bothered to learn. People love to say family always cares, but that's a lie. Family cares when it benefits them, when it gives them status, when it feeds their pride. My parents weren't interested in Ethan, not as a person, not as the man who made me feel safe and loved. They cared about one thing. What does he have? And because Ethan never bragged, never showed off, never acted superior, they assumed he was average. But Ethan wasn't average, not even close. The truth about the man I married. Ethan grew up wealthy, yes. His family owned a massive manufacturing and logistics company factories across multiple states, government contracts, international suppliers, old money, generational money, the type people write documentaries about. But you would never know it by looking at him. He didn't wear designer clothes. He didn't drive sports cars. He didn't talk about wealth. He didn't care about people who worship status. He wanted to build something himself. So instead of living off his family name, he started a small tech company his junior year of college. No connections, no special treatment, just sleepless nights, passion, and stubborn determination. He hired other struggling students. He paid wages before he paid himself. He went without food some days just to make payroll. By the time we got married, that small startup was negotiating multi-million-dollar partnerships. He wasn't just the CEO, he was a self-made CEO. But none of that mattered to my parents when they ignored my wedding. The world has a funny way of exposing people. When their narrative started cracking. It started innocently. A neighbor saw an article in a business magazine. Local tech entrepreneur Ethan Park raises $47 million in funding. His photo was there. My photo was there. Our wedding photo, small, beautiful, joyful, was printed next to the article. Within 2 days, my phone exploded. Mom, why didn't you tell us he was successful? Dad, why would you hide something like this? Jason, is it true? That's insane. Why would you keep it from us? I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because they proved everything I had known since childhood. They never asked about him. They never asked about us. They never even cared enough to show up to the wedding. They didn't want a relationship. They wanted access. When they showed up uninvited, it was a Saturday morning. I was cooking pancakes. Ethan was playing with our golden retriever in the living room. The doorbell rang. When I opened it, my parents and Jason were standing on the porch, holding flowers, balloons, and a gift bag like they were about to star in a commercial for fake happiness. My mom pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. "Oh, sweetie, look at your home. You've done so well." My dad scanned the living room large windows, white marble floors, high ceilings, designer furniture, and his eyes sparkled. He didn't see a home. He saw dollar signs. Jason let out a long whistle. Damn, I knew he wasn't just some random guy. There it was, no apology, no regret, no recognition of what they'd done, just greed, just excitement that they suddenly had something to brag about. The fake apology. My mom hugged me, something she hadn't done in years. Her voice turned syrupy sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. "We're so sorry we missed the wedding," she said. "You know how busy things were. If we had known it was this important, we would have come." I pulled away. "You didn't miss it because you were busy," I said calmly. "You missed it because we weren't good enough to impress anyone." Her smile froze. My father cleared his throat. "Well, what matters is we're here now. We'd love to get to know Ethan better." Convenient timing. Ethan stepped into the room, polite as ever, shook their hands, and offered coffee. He wasn't rude. He wasn't cold. He was respectful, graceful, mature. Meanwhile, my family looked around like they were touring a museum. Mom poked at expensive art pieces. Dad calculated prices in his head. Jason asked which car was ours. They didn't ask about our relationship. They didn't ask if we were happy. They didn't ask if they had hurt us. They only cared about what it looked like. The moment their true intentions fell out of their mouths, Mom finally said it. She couldn't help herself. "You know, it's such a shame we didn't have a big wedding. With Ethan's position, you could have afforded something grand." Ah, there it was, the truth. She wasn't sorry she missed the wedding. She was sorry she missed the show. I stared at her. You weren't interested in being there, I said. You were interested in being seen there. She blinked, offended. How can you say that? We're your family. Family. Funny word. Family shows up. Family supports. Family stands beside you even when there's nothing to gain. But to them, family meant we take, you give. The conversation that changed everything. After coffee, my father leaned back in his chair and casually said, "You know, if you two want to buy a bigger place, we could move in for a while. Help with things. Help." They never helped me in my entire life. Jason added, "I'm thinking of starting a business. Maybe Ethan could invest. You know, family supporting family." Mom nodded quickly. "Yes, we should stick together. We're stronger as a family." I looked at them, all three, and said nothing, because I didn't need to defend myself. Ethan spoke instead. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "We love our life as it is, just the two of us. And as for business investment, I only work with people I have a strong relationship with." My parents' faces stiffened. They weren't expecting resistance. They thought the money guaranteed obedience. They thought love could be bought like groceries. They forgot one thing. I wasn't invisible anymore. The aftermath. When they realized Ethan wouldn't play along, their friendliness quickly faded. My dad's voice hardened. "We're just trying to be part of your life." My response was quiet. "You weren't there when I needed you, but now that you want something, you're suddenly family." Jason muttered something under his breath. Mom scoffed. "We drove hours to see you, and this is how you treat us?" I looked her straight in the eyes. "You didn't come to see me, you came to see what you could take." And for the first time in my life, I watched them lose control. They weren't angry because I was wrong. They were angry because I was right. The line I drew. They left with fake smiles gone, balloons abandoned on the counter, and a gift bag that still had the store receipt inside. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Ethan wrapped his arms around me from behind. "You okay?" I nodded. "I am now." For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging for love. I wasn't apologizing for existing. I wasn't chasing validation from people incapable of giving it. I chose myself. And because of that, everything that followed, the manipulation, the lies, the public humiliation, the desperate attempts to claw their way back into our lives, only proved one thing. Some people don't want to love you. They want to use you. And the moment you stop being useful, they stop pretending. The wedding no one wanted to attend. The morning of my wedding was quiet. Almost too quiet. Most brides wake up to a bustling house filled with people, family laughing, cousins running around, sisters doing makeup, mothers giving advice no one asked for. I woke up to silence. No one from my family was there. No calls, no texts, no congratulations, nothing. Just the faint sound of birds outside the window and the nervous tapping of my own heart beating against my ribs. It wasn't supposed to be a lonely wedding. It was supposed to be small but meaningful, something intimate, something built on love, not money or attention. But the small part offended my family, not because they cared about being there, but because it wasn't grand enough to brag about. The week before the wedding, when we told my parents the wedding would be a small ceremony in a botanical garden with only 25 guests, my mother's face twisted as if I'd said I planned to get married in a gas station parking lot. 25 guests? People will think we're poor, she hissed. I calmly replied, "We want something simple, something peaceful." My father simply shook his head. "If you can't afford a proper wedding, postpone it. It's embarrassing." Postpone. Because anything not impressive enough was a disgrace to them. I remember trying one more time. "It's not about money. We don't want a big crowd. We want something private." Then came the sentence that burned itself into my memory forever. "Well," my mother said coldly, "if you insist on making this cheap, don't expect us to show up." And they didn't. They stuck to their word with a cruelty that felt rehearsed. The morning of the ceremony. When I woke up, my fiancé Mark knocked on the door of the bridal suite. He knew the truth. He knew my family wasn't coming. He'd asked several times, "Are you sure? Maybe they just need time." But I knew better. I opened the door with a small smile. He didn't say anything, just placed his hands on my face and kissed my forehead. That simple gesture was the only comfort I needed. The makeup artist arrived first, then the florist, then my dress. The room slowly filled with soft music, fresh roses, and gentle voices telling me I looked beautiful. But a piece of me ached, a piece that still wished my family cared. There was a knock on the door. My heart jumped. Maybe, just maybe. They changed their mind, but it wasn't them. It was Emily, my childhood best friend, who had flown across the country just to stand beside me. She opened her arms and I collapsed into them, crying into her shoulder. She whispered, "Families aren't always blood. Some are chosen." And she was right. The ceremony. The garden was breathtaking. White roses lined the path, sunlight gently filtered through the trees, and the sky was the perfect shade of blue, the kind that looks like a blessing. 25 chairs sat in neat rows, 25 seats filled with warmth, love, and real people who wanted to be there. As I walked down the aisle, a soft breeze picked up my veil and lifted it like wings. Mark cried when he saw me. It wasn't dramatic or exaggerated, it was real, raw emotion, the kind that melts the weight of your past. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need a big wedding to feel important. I didn't need an audience or approval. All I needed was the man waiting at the end of that aisle. We exchanged vows, quiet, sincere, trembling. He promised me peace. I promised him loyalty. We promised each other a life without cruelty. When we kissed, every person stood and clapped, not because it was a performance, but because it was love. Even without my family, I felt whole. The empty seats. But later, during the reception, when everyone was dancing and laughing, I slipped away for a moment. I found myself staring at the row of chairs that were meant for my parents' and siblings' chairs that were intentionally left empty. It was symbolic. It was painful. It was real. I sat down in one of them and let myself grieve not for their absence, but for the years I spent craving their presence. Emily found me there. "Hurts, doesn't it?" she whispered. I nodded. "It's like they chose pride over me." She squeezed my hand. "They always did. You just never admitted it." She was right. My family didn't skip my wedding because it was small. They skipped it because I was the one getting married. If it had been anyone else, if it had been my sister, if it had been a wedding with 300 guests, chandeliers, a string quartet, they'd have been there in a heartbeat. But for me, they simply didn't care enough. Not until later, when they discovered something that changed everything. The reception. It was beautiful, magical even. We didn't spend thousands on decorations. We didn't hire extravagant entertainers. There were fairy lights, soft music, homemade desserts, laughter, and real toasts that came from the heart. Emily toasted, "To the bride who grew up unloved but learned how to love without becoming bitter." People cried. I cried. It was the kind of night that filled every scar inside me with gentle healing. When Mark and I shared our first dance, I sank into his arms and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a family, even when mine never tried to be one." He kissed my temple. "You deserved this love a long time ago." The photos. The photographer later told me, "I've shot 300 weddings. I have never seen a bride smile with so much sadness and joy at the same time." And he was right. Every picture captured a contrast, a bride glowing in happiness but hiding the deep burn of rejection. When the night ended, people hugged me for a long time, longer than usual. They knew what my family had done. They knew I was strong, but that strength came with wounds no one should have. We drove away in a simple car decorated with hand-tied ribbons, not rented luxury, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt chosen, not tolerated, not compared, not criticized, just chosen. And then, for 2 months my family stayed silent. Not a call, not a message, not even a fake congrats. To them I had tarnished the family image. Then one morning, everything changed. My mother called, breathless, excited, and suddenly extremely interested in my life. And the first thing she said was, "Oh, honey, why didn't you tell us Mark is a CEO?" The wedding they couldn't bother to attend. I woke up the morning of my wedding expecting to feel nervous. Instead, I felt hollow. My mother hadn't texted. My father hadn't called. Even my brother, who used to be my protector when we were kids, hadn't bothered to check in. The silence was deafening. Ethan noticed it right away. He held my hands and said quietly, "You don't have to be brave today. You can just be happy." I tried to believe him. A small wedding, a big statement. Our ceremony wasn't meant to be extravagant, just something simple, elegant, and full of meaning. A garden, an archway of white roses, 30 guests we truly loved. It wasn't about showing off, it was about starting a life. But to my parents, anything that didn't scream, "Look how wealthy we are," was an embarrassment. When I'd told my mother the plan, she'd scoffed, 30 people? That's not a wedding, that's a picnic. And that was the last conversation we had before the big day. The empty chairs. The music began, and I walked down the aisle on my own. No father to give me away, no mother dabbing tears of joy. There were 2 empty chairs at the front. I'd left them there on purpose, symbols of what they'd chosen to miss. My chest hurt when I saw them, but it also brought clarity. Sometimes people's absence speaks louder than their presence ever could. Ethan's parents were there. They treated me like their own daughter. His mother slipped a note into my hand before the ceremony started. It read, "You are loved here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I still keep that note in my jewelry box. Promises made without witnesses. When Ethan took my hands during our vows, I realized something profound. It didn't matter who wasn't there. What mattered was who was. He said, voice trembling, "I don't promise you a perfect life. I promise you a kind one." That sentence more than the ring, more than the kiss healed something my family had broken long ago. When the ceremony ended, the guests clapped. There was laughter, hugs, and warmth, but even in joy, grief has a way of whispering. I caught myself glancing again at those empty chairs. For years, I'd begged my family to see me, but on that day, I finally understood. They weren't blind. They just didn't want to look. The reception. Our reception was in the same garden under strings of lights. Homemade food, soft music, children running barefoot in the grass. It was everything I wanted. Quiet, intimate, full of real love. During the toasts, my best friend Emily raised her glass. To the bride who learned that love doesn't need permission to exist. Everyone cheered. Everyone except the ones who should have been there. Ethan leaned close to me and whispered, "This is the life we're building, not the one we left behind." I nodded, but my throat burned, because even when you know you're better off without certain people, letting go still feels like mourning. After the wedding. For a week afterward, there was nothing but silence from my family. No call, no message, no congratulations. Then, one afternoon, an article appeared online. Young tech innovator Ethan Cole, named one of the fastest-growing CEOs in the country. His face was on the cover. Mine was beside him, smiling from our wedding photo. That's when everything changed. My phone buzzed nonstop, missed calls, texts, voicemails. Mom, "Sweetheart, why didn't you tell us Ethan was successful?" Dad, "We should celebrate. We had no idea." Brother, "Man, that's insane. So proud of you guys." But the messages weren't full of pride. They were full of curiosity. They didn't want to know how we were doing. They wanted to know what they could gain. when they came knocking. 2 days later, they showed up. No warning, no apology. My mom holding a bouquet. My dad with a grin so forced it looked painful. "Surprise," she said, as if she hadn't boycotted my wedding 3 weeks earlier. "We just couldn't wait to see our favorite newlyweds." Favorite? They hadn't even RSVP'd. I wanted to slam the door. Ethan gently squeezed my shoulder and said, "It's okay, let's hear them out." But deep down, I already knew. They weren't there for reconciliation. They were there for recognition. The polished lies over coffee. My mom glanced around the living room, her eyes wide. "This place is gorgeous. You must be doing very well." My dad chuckled. "Ethan, I read about your company impressive work, son." Son. The word almost made me laugh. He'd never even called Ethan before the wedding. Then came the pitch. "Your cousin wants to start a business," Dad said carefully. "Maybe Ethan could offer some mentorship, maybe even an investment." I stared at him in disbelief. No apology, no acknowledgement, just greed disguised as family bonding. Ethan smiled politely, the way CEOs are trained to when rejecting bad deals. "I'm happy to share advice," he said, "but I don't invest in people I don't know well." My parents froze. My mom's voice sharpened. "Well, we're family. Surely that counts for something." Ethan looked at me, then said, softly but firmly, "Family shows up when it matters most." And with that, the conversation was over. When they finally left, my mother's parting words were, "You've changed." She was wrong. I hadn't changed. I had simply stopped apologizing for being me. When love turned into leverage. For a brief moment after my parents left that day, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. They didn't stop visiting. They didn't stop calling. They just changed tactics. The family who once dismissed me as too emotional was now sending daily messages sprinkled with sweetness that felt artificial. "We're so proud of you. You always were the smart one. Your husband seems like such a gentleman." At first, I wanted to believe them. I wanted to think maybe, finally, they saw my worth. But it became clear very quickly that this new love came with a price tag. A different kind of invitation. It started with a text from my mother. "Your cousin's engagement party is next weekend. We'd love for you and Ethan to attend." A month earlier, they hadn't even invited us to family brunches. Now, suddenly, we were the guests of honor. Ethan looked at me with that knowing, gentle expression. "You don't owe them your presence," he said. But I decided to go. Maybe some part of me still needed to prove to them, or maybe to myself that I belonged. When we walked into that fancy banquet hall, all heads turned. People who hadn't spoken to me in years smiled like we were lifelong friends. One aunt actually said, "You look different now, money suits you." I smiled politely, but my stomach twisted. That night wasn't about celebration, it was about status. And for the first time in my life, I was the currency. The charity gala. A few weeks later, my father called. "Sweetheart, there's a charity gala next month," he said. "All the right people will be there. You and Ethan should come. It'll be good exposure for him." Exposure. Like my husband needed marketing, not meaning. I told him we were busy. He insisted. That's when Ethan took the phone. "Sir," he said calmly, "I appreciate the invitation, but I don't attend events for optics." There was a long silence. Then my father's forced laugh. Of course. I just thought, since you're successful, you'd want to give back." He didn't mean charity. He meant visibility. He wanted to be seen standing next to us. The Christmas incident. By December, I'd grown tired of playing polite. We decided to host Christmas dinner, just a small one, with Ethan's parents and a few close friends. But the night before, I got another call. "We're coming tomorrow," Mom said. "I'll bring dessert." I hesitated. "Mom, it's a small dinner. We already have plans." She scoffed. "Oh, so now you're too good for your family?" And just like that, guilt and old familiar ghost crept back in. So I said yes. They arrived 2 hours late, loud and glittering, carrying gifts like trophies. My mother immediately started talking about Ethan's company as if she'd been his biggest supporter from day one. "I always knew you'd go far," she told him, sipping wine she hadn't brought. "I told everyone at church that you're practically changing the tech world." I caught Ethan's eyes from across the table. He didn't have to say anything. I knew he hated the charade as much as I did, but he stayed gracious, because that's who he is, and because he knew this wasn't really about him, it was about me confronting my own ghosts. The real motive. 2 days later, my mother asked to have coffee, just the two of us. I met her at a cafe downtown, hoping maybe she wanted to rebuild something real. She started with small talk, compliments, memories of childhood I hadn't thought about in years. For a moment, I softened. Then she sighed dramatically. "You know, your father's been struggling at work lately. Things have been hard." I stared. "I'm sorry to hear that." "What do you need, Mom?" She hesitated, then smiled sweetly. "Well, maybe Ethan could talk to some of his business friends, just to help your father out. He's not asking for money, of course, just opportunities." And there it was. The truth I'd been trying not to see. Their affection wasn't about love. It was about leverage. The breaking point. When I told Ethan later, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You can't keep letting them rent space in your peace." He was right. So I decided to finally stop hiding behind politeness. A week later, we invited my parents over. I cooked dinner, lit candles, made everything calm, because I needed control. Halfway through the meal, my dad said cheerfully, "We've been thinking maybe you two could invest in a property with us. Family business, you know." I set my fork down. "Dad," I said, "you didn't come to my wedding. You didn't even text me when I was in the hospital last year. But now that Ethan's in the papers, suddenly I'm your daughter again?" Silence. My mother's lips tightened. "That's not fair." "It's perfectly fair," I cut her off. "You cared about appearances more than people. You still do." Ethan gently placed his hand on mine. "We love you both, but we won't be part of any deal. Not business, not emotional." My dad tried to laugh it off. My mom called me ungrateful, and I let them. Because arguing with people who only listen to their reflection is useless. When they left, Ethan looked at me and said, "That was the first time you didn't apologize for existing." And I cried, because he was right. Silence again. But different. After that dinner, the calls stopped. The texts stopped. For the first time, silence felt like freedom instead of rejection. I learned that letting go of toxic love doesn't make you heartless. It makes you whole. Ethan and I started focusing on what we wanted to build. A marriage grounded in respect, not performance. We traveled, we laughed, we created a home that felt warm, not watchful. Sometimes I still missed my family, not who they were, but who I wished they could have been. But grief slowly turned into gratitude, because losing them gave me space to find myself. When they came back one last time, a year passed, a year of peace, of quiet breakfasts with Ethan, of Sunday walks with no guilt hanging over me. I thought the story with my family had ended, but stories like that rarely end neatly. They wait like unhealed scars until something forces them open again. The unexpected call. It was a Thursday morning when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. Mom, I almost didn't answer, but curiosity, or maybe habit, won. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. "Sweetheart, it's your father. He's in the hospital." I froze. "What happened?" She sighed. "Heart issues. They say he'll need surgery. It's expensive." And then, after a long pause, "We were hoping you and Ethan could help." I felt the old ache return, the tug of guilt, the pull of duty. But this time, it met something stronger. Self-respect. Visiting the hospital. Ethan insisted on coming with me. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and grief. My father looked fragile, pale, smaller somehow. For a moment, I forgot everything. I just saw my dad. He smiled weakly when he saw me. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I did," I said, because no matter how much pain they caused, I wasn't cruel. My mother stood by the bed, silent. Her eyes darted between Ethan and the bouquet he'd brought, expensive, tasteful, like everything he did. She finally said, "We're not asking for much. Just a little help with the bills. You two are in a good place now." And there it was again, the expectation that love equaled rescue. The choice. That night, I couldn't sleep. Part of me wanted to pay for everything just to make the guilt stop. But another part whispered, "You've already paid enough." Ethan sat beside me holding my hand. "You can help if it brings you peace," he said softly, "but don't do it to earn their love. That debt was never yours." I realized he was right. No amount of money could fix what they'd broken by choice, so I decided to help, but on my terms. We quietly covered some of the hospital expenses through an anonymous donation. No signatures, no acknowledgement, just compassion without attachment. The visit that changed everything. When I visited a few days later, Dad looked stronger. He thanked me, assuming I'd convinced Ethan to pay. I didn't correct him. Some truths aren't worth arguing over. Then, out of nowhere, he said something I'll never forget. "I was wrong about him. About you. I thought success came from control. But you found it through love." My throat tightened. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing he'd ever given me. My mother, however, remained distant. When I hugged her goodbye, she said, "Don't be a stranger. Family should stick together." Her tone was soft, but her eyes were calculating, and I knew she hadn't changed. 2 years later, Ethan and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Lily. Becoming a mother shifted everything again. Holding that tiny, perfect person in my arms, I realized something profound. I couldn't control who my family had been, but I could control the kind of family I built. We raised Lily with kindness, boundaries, and truth. No silent treatment, no favoritism, no love with strings attached. For the first time, I understood what healing really meant. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even forgiveness. It was breaking a pattern and building something better. The final encounter. When Lily turned 1, my parents reached out again. They wanted to meet their granddaughter. Ethan left the decision to me, and after days of thought, I agreed, but only for one visit. When they arrived, my mother carried expensive gifts, a gold bracelet for Lily, designer baby clothes. I smiled politely but said, "She doesn't need things. She needs people who show up with love, not labels." My father looked down. My mother bristled. "You make us sound like villains," she muttered. "You made yourselves that way," I said softly. They stayed for an hour. Polite conversation, careful smiles, and when they left, I knew deep down that it would be the last time, because sometimes closure isn't reconciliation. Sometimes it's simply deciding you've heard enough goodbyes. Full circle years later, Ethan and I renewed our vows, this time surrounded by true family, friends who had become siblings, mentors who'd become parents, a daughter who made every wound worth healing. As we stood under the same arch of white roses from our first wedding, I felt peace. I looked at Ethan and whispered, "Do you think they ever understood what they lost?" He smiled. "Maybe not, but you understood what you gained." He was right. I'd spent half my life trying to earn love from people who couldn't give it. The other half, I built a life where love didn't have to be earned, it was simply shared. Lessons learned. If there's one thing my story taught me, it's this. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by behavior. People who only celebrate you when you succeed were never cheering for you. They were cheering for what you could give them. And when you stop trying to please them, you'll discover something beautiful. Peace. the kind of peace that no amount of approval or money can buy. Epilogue. Sometimes, when I pass by the old family home, I remember the girl I used to be, the one who begged for her parents' love, the one who thought being small and quiet would make her worthy. I wish I could tell her what I know now. You were always enough. You just needed to stop shrinking to fit inside someone else's comfort. And when I look at my daughter, laughing freely in the sunlight, I know I've already rewritten the ending.